It was supposed to be a calm and safe trip to space. But a malfunction in the spaceship wakes him up.
How are you feeling?
We are all on the starship Avalon.
But I'm the only one here.
There are 5,000 passengers.
So why am I alone?
And now he will be stranded in space for 90 years. Alone. Welcome back to Favorite Recap. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to channel for more recaps like this.
Have a wonderful day.
As the movie starts, we see an interstellar spaceship named Avalon gliding through space, en route to a new colony called Homestead 2. This massive spaceship operates on autopilot with its cabins empty, as all its 5,000 passengers and 258 crew members sleep in deep hibernation. However, this journey is suddenly interrupted when Avalon enters an asteroid belt. Although the ship's shields absorb the initial impacts, a massive asteroid breaches the defenses and collides with the ship, triggering a cascade of malfunctions inside. In response, the ship initiates automatic repairs, but one critical failure causes one of the hibernation pods to malfunction, waking Jim Preston, who is a mechanical engineer. Initially disoriented, Jim is guided through the awakening process by the automated system, which informs him that he's been in suspended animation for 120 years and is now just 4 months from Homestead 2. Relieved and eager, Jim begins to explore his surroundings, while anticipating the company of other passengers. In the meantime, he receives a briefing about his ID band, cabin, and the ship's luxurious amenities meant to prepare him for life on the new planet. However, his excitement was short-lived. As he attends an orientation class designed for a large group, Jim discovers that he is the only participant. In the class, a hologram explains Earth's deteriorating conditions, overpopulation and high living costs, but ignores his questions about the absence of others. Frustrated, Jim leaves to search for other passengers. He finds that the main concourse is deserted, but an automated help desk directs him to find a steward. He follows the instructions but discovers the crew is also missing. Then, reaching the bridge, he finds that no one, not even the captain, is awake. Now deeply worried about what is happening, Jim visits the observatory, where he finds a shocking revelation. The ship is not 4 months but 90 years away from its destination. He's woken up far too early. Desperate for guidance, he attempts to contact Earth, only to learn that any response would take 55 years to arrive. Overwhelmed by the hopeless situation, Jim's despair grows as he thinks about the implications of living out the rest of his life alone in the spaceship. Moments later, as he wanders aimlessly, he stumbles upon the ship's bar and finds Arthur, an android bartender. At first, Jim was relieved to have some semblance of company, but he soon realizes Arthur's limited capacity to understand or help with his predicament. The bartender offers polite conversation but no solutions, leaving Jim to continue with his isolation. As he tries to find ways to fix his situation, Jim focuses on his hibernation pod. After gathering tools, he works tirelessly to reactivate it, but he fails. His next attempt involves breaking into the crew's hibernation chambers, but this too proves futile. Meanwhile, minor system malfunctions continue to occur throughout the ship, adding to Jim's growing sense of unease. In his loneliness, Jim turns to the bar, seeking comfort in drinks and Arthur's companionship. Arthur suggests he make the most of his circumstances by indulging in the ship's first-class amenities. Following this advice, Jim sneaks into gold-class sections as he experiences the ship's high-end restaurants, games, and entertainment systems. For a brief time, he distracts himself with these luxuries, but excitement soon wears off, leaving him even more aware of his loneliness. As weeks turn into months, Jim's mental state starts to deteriorate. One night, while intoxicated and emotionally drained, he roams the ship and finds himself near the hibernation pods. His wanderings lead him to an airlock housing spacesuits for extravehicular activity. Driven by a mix of curiosity and depression, Jim wears a spacesuit and heads to the airlock. With trembling hands, he pulls the lever and presses the button to open the airlock door, unsure of what he hopes to find. Once outside the Avalon, Jim is captivated by the breathtaking view of space. The sheer vastness and beauty overwhelm him, but he's soon struck by the realization that he is the only conscious human witnessing this moment. Eventually, he returns inside, removes the spacesuit, and contemplates his despicable state. Pushed by his hopelessness, he goes back to the airlock, this time without his suit as he prepares to end his life. However, at the very last moment, he changes his mind, retreats inside, and he accidentally slips on a bottle. As Jim gathers himself, his attention is drawn to a woman in one of the hibernation pods. Her name, Aurora, is displayed on the pod. Intrigued by her, Jim searches her files in the ship's database and listens to her passenger interview. Her charisma, voice, and dreams captivate him, and he becomes deeply drawn to her. Jim spends hours listening to her interviews, reading her writing, and even sitting beside her pod, amazed by the kind of person she seems to be. Days later at the bar, he discusses her work with Arthur, while struggling with the cruel irony of his situation. He remembers that he had left Earth seeking a better life, but with his current situation, he is now destined never to reach his destination. Although he seems to have found his ideal companion, yet she remains inaccessible. As his obsession grows, the idea of waking Aurora up starts to take roots in his heart. Jim knows the ethical implications. Bringing her out of hibernation would condemn her to the same fate, a life stranded aboard the ship. Initially, he decides against it, but the loneliness and longing tug at him until he finally decides otherwise. One fateful day, Jim activates Aurora's pod. As she awakens, confused and disoriented, he hides and quickly retreats to his cabin. Later on, he goes to the main concourse, where he finds Aurora, confused and trying to understand her situation. Jim approaches and explains that they are the only two people awake on the ship. He shows her the observatory and tells her the unfortunate truth. The crew and main ship systems are inaccessible, and there's no way to return to hibernation. Aurora, shocked and panicked, demands to return to her pod, hopeful that it'd work for her. However, Jim gently explains that the technology to re-enter hibernation isn't available on the ship, and this has left them stranded. Though initially worried for herself, Aurora realizes the reality around and sympathizes with Jim, imagining the loneliness he must have endured for over a year. However, Aurora continues to try to make sense of her new reality, determined to find a solution, while Jim becomes burdened by guilt over his decision to wake her. He even pleads with Arthur not to reveal his role in her waking Aurora. In the following days, Aurora starts to adjust to life aboard Avalon. She explores the ship, investigates the hibernation pods, and studies the ship's systems as she keeps holding on to hope for a solution. Unlike Jim, who has resigned himself to their predicament, Aurora tirelessly searches for answers. She goes through research documents, examines the infirmary, and even tries to access the locked crew quarters. As time passes, Aurora begins to process her new reality. She writes, exercises, and explores, but her frustrations mount up. One day, when she has an honest chat with Jim, she asks about his motivations for leaving Earth. Initially, he was not straightforward, but soon he revealed that it is his desire to find a fresh start and a chance to build a meaningful life. In turn, Aurora shares her purpose. As a journalist, she had planned to document life on Homestead 2 for a year before returning to Earth. Now, those dreams seem impossibly distant. Seeing Aurora's growing despair, Jim makes an effort to lift her spirits. He takes her dancing, shows her the ship's cinema, and even plays games with her. They also visit the bar, where Arthur entertains them with funny comments. Slowly, Aurora begins to relax. Although Jim's guilt lingers, he continues to keep finding ways to make amends in small, thoughtful ways. He creates a miniature replica of the Chrysler Building for Aurora, a gesture that deeply moves her. Their relationship deepens as they spend more time together. Jim and Aurora share stories, laugh, and grow closer. On a date, Jim takes her for a spacewalk, giving her a chance to experience the same awesome view that captivated him earlier. As they float weightlessly in space, they connect on a profound level, sharing an unforgettable moment of beauty and togetherness. They return inside, their bond solidifies, and soon, they begin living as a couple. Aurora moves into Jim's cabin, and they build a routine, eating, jogging, and experiencing the ship's wonders together. As Jim continues to explore the ship, he finds a hydroponics bay where he picks flowers for Aurora. On her birthday, he plans a special celebration. After dinner at one of the ship's elegant restaurants, they visit the bar, where Jim prepares to propose with a handmade ring. As he steps away to finalize his surprise, Aurora chats with Arthur. Unintentionally, the android reveals Jim's secret, that he was the one who woke her up. Devastated by this news, Aurora confronts Jim in disbelief. Her anger and betrayal are palpable as she storms away, leaving Jim in despair. In the following days, their relationship remains severed as Jim attempts speaking to her, but she avoids him, unwilling to face the man who, in her eyes, robbed her of her future. One night, unable to contain her emotions, she storms into Jim's cabin, jumps on him punching and kicking, driven by the desire to punish him for taking her life away. Jim later tries to reach her through the ship's communication system, since she avoids him. He attempts to explain his actions, confessing that he fell in love with her. However, Aurora is unmoved. Her pain and anger overshadow any sympathy, and she tells him she cannot forgive him for what he has done. As days pass, the Avalon begins to exhibit more severe malfunctions. One night, while Jim is in his cabin, the ship experiences a critical error, causing the main command to shut down. Later, as he rides an elevator, it malfunctions dangerously. Aurora, in the meantime, walks into the main concourse and notices a tree Jim has planted there. She then heads to the cantina, where the food dispensary is also malfunctioning. Suddenly, they hear a voice over the ship's communication system. It's Gus Mancuso, the ship captain, asking about the tree. Both Jim and Aurora rush to the concourse and meet Mancuso, who is standing by the tree. Introducing themselves, they recount their predicament. Mancuso is puzzled, unable to comprehend how 3 pods, including his own, malfunctioned. Suspecting something is wrong, he takes them to the bridge to investigate. There, he discovers an underlying issue with the ship, but much of the system's data must be checked manually. As they leave the bridge, a maintenance robot nearly falls on them, further showing the ship's escalating issues. Jim and Aurora explain that malfunctions have been happening across the vessel. Mancuso shows them how to gather the necessary diagnostic data and begins investigating the hibernation pods. While working, Jim confesses to Mancuso about waking Aurora. Mancuso is appalled by Jim's actions, but sets aside judgment to focus on the larger issue. Later, Mancuso and Aurora discuss her pod's failure on the bridge. He sympathizes but admits he cannot reverse the damage. Jim arrives with yet another broken robot. Mancuso, suffering from hibernation sickness, excuses himself to rest but almost collapses, coughing up blood as he leaves. That night, Aurora, unable to sleep, decides to swim in the ship's pool. Suddenly, the gravity fails, causing her to float helplessly as water engulfs her. Just as she is about to drown, the gravity drive resets, and she barely escapes. Alarmed by this occurrence, Aurora and Jim meet up and rush to find Mancuso. Together, they return to the bridge and begin piecing together the ship's history. Mancuso deduces that an event that happened 2 years earlier damaged a critical system, forcing the ship to overcompensate. Unless they identify and fix the root cause, the entire vessel, and everyone aboard, will be doomed. As they search for the problem, Mancuso collapses again. Jim and Aurora take him to the infirmary, where it becomes clear he is dying from irreversible complications. Later, the trio gathers in the observatory. Mancuso, knowing his time is short, hands his ID bracelet to Jim and entrusts them with saving the ship. Moments later, he succumbs to his illness. As if echoing their loss, the ship's lights turn an ominous red, and the vessel begins to shake violently. Jim and Aurora race to the engineering deck to address the crisis. On the way, another failure affects the gravity drive, and Arthur malfunctions. So, Jim deactivates Arthur before continuing. Upon reaching the power plant, they locate the issue. An asteroid strike has breached the hull, causing widespread damage. As they open the hatch, Aurora is nearly sucked into the void, followed by Jim, who clings desperately to the hatch before sealing the breach. Their relief is short-lived as Jim realizes multiple breaches exist. Tracing the asteroid's trajectory, they discover it struck the reactor control computer. Jim believes they can replace the damaged parts, and they manage to locate and install replacements. However, venting the reactor proves unsuccessful. Jim realizes that the vent doors must be opened manually, a task requiring someone to go outside the ship. Jim volunteers for the dangerous mission. Before leaving, he gives Aurora Mancuso's ID bracelet, telling her he might not return. As she helps him prepare, Aurora pleads with him to come back while telling him that she can't endure life aboard the ship alone. She returns to monitor the reactor as Jim exits the airlock. As Jim approaches the vent, Aurora is injured by a bolt from the overheated reactor. Meanwhile, Jim struggles with the external vent doors, realizing he must hold them open manually for the reactor to cool. Communicating over the comms, he tells Aurora to initiate the venting process. She hesitates, horrified by the prospect of losing him, but Jim insists it's the only way to save the lives of the sleeping passengers. Reluctantly, Aurora follows his instructions. The venting process succeeds, but the powerful fumes propel Jim away from the ship, breaking his tether and leaving him adrift in space. As he continues to drift in space, the pressure in his suit begins to drop. He contacts Aurora, explaining the dire situation. Determined to save him, Aurora rushes to retrieve the second spacesuit in an attempt to rescue him. Jim apologizes once more, his voice filled with regret. Aurora wears the suit and ventures out, but her tether is too short to reach him. Just as she is pulled back, she grabs onto Jim's tether and manages to pull him back inside. Dragging Jim to the infirmary, Aurora realizes he is already dead. Desperate, she uses Mancuso's bracelet to override the medical pod's protocols and initiate an emergency resuscitation. The pod works automatically, administering the necessary medications, and Jim is successfully revived. In that moment, Aurora forgives him, and their relationship is restored. Together, they repair Arthur and give Mancuso a dignified space burial. Jim then reveals a discovery. He can now modify the medical pod to function as a hibernation chamber. So, he tells Aurora to use it to complete the journey to Homestead 2. However, Aurora chooses to stay awake with him and share the years ahead. Jim then proposes to marry her, and together they embrace life on the ship. As the movie ends, we see that 88 years later, the Avalon has reached Homestead 2. The awakened crew finds the ship transformed, with Aurora's message playing over the speakers and recounting the extraordinary life she and Jim shared. If you enjoyed this recap, be sure to leave a comment and like this video. Thanks for watching.